9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
Hello again. I'm in Yangon still, and I know when to go out, and I know when to stay in, get things done. That's a quote from David Bowie. I tasted blood in the garden. That's a quote from Howard Devoto, my two great songwriting heroes. And they kind of structure today's talk. I'm still in Yangon, and I'm kind of at that transitional phase, that kind of position of the telescope where you zoom from the micro to the macro. When you, or that moment in a location where you start to turn inwards a little bit, you get bored with the with what's around you to the extent that you can actually be a little bit more attentive to your inner states. So I don't know how to spend more than about 4 hours outdoors during the day. I get tired or it's too hot. I'm still getting used to the fact that it's like summer and winter here. Although we're not in the southern hemisphere, we're still close enough to the equator that we get this everyday very hot sunny weather. So I feel like I'm in what in Japan would be August, but it's actually February. And I tasted blood in the garden. That's from a song called The Garden, which is the very last song on the very last of the canonical magazine albums from the early 80s, 70s and the 80s. And it's a song about insects from the point of view of an insect in a garden, and it shows what a bloodbath, if you actually zoom in on that scale, what a bloodbath is actually going on, what a terrible series of atrocities, banal, humdrum, everyday atrocities a garden might be. And I'm kind of getting to that stage with my life in this hotel room, which is a windowless cube. Actually, it's a very clean, very nice Chinese hotel in Rangoon, Chinatown. But there are inevitably some little problems and little ants running about if I leave food on my table. Or there are bed bugs, unfortunately, so my back is a bit of a battlefield. I think I was just bitten one night by these bed bugs, but I've really kind of swollen up and got little horrible pus-filled blisters and things on my back now, which I'm trying not to scratch, not entirely successfully. So I'm very conscious of the fact that, there can be this tiny scaled battlefield which can weigh a great deal with you. It can become very important. If it gets under your skin, literally, this can be the most important thing happening. And also that if you avoid drama in one area, it will crawl into another, literally. And so, in a way, as a tourist here, I know nobody in this city. I'm here initially for a month, and I'm extending it to 2 months, which is kind of crazy. I have nothing to do here. I know nobody here. And I'm kind of taking things easy, but also I'm not the kind of person to take things easy. I have quite a fast metabolic rate, a certain level of background anxiety, which keeps me pretty active. So even when I'm walking down the street in this fairly leisurely city for flaneurs, really, I tend to be kind of impatient and to be as if I'm in New York or Tokyo or London, trying to get to the next appointment and to earn the next dollar to pay the rent and all the rest of it. When here, I really don't need to, because what I find here is that, ridiculously small amounts of money will see you through ridiculously long amounts of time, and everything is so cheap and it's so easy to exist here just on the purely material level. What is not so easy, though, is to stay healthy, and I've actually been vomiting a bit and had sort of diarrhea and all the usual traveller's tummy problems of a person from a rich northern country with good water and good air and all the rest of it, basic hygiene standards, coming to a country which doesn't have those. So I've been struggling a little bit to be able to keep eating. I keep thinking I can eat the street food now, and then finding actually no, you can't, being laid low for a day or two because I foolishly ate the wrong thing, and you never quite know what's going to tip you over into back into the old porcelain embrace of the vomitorium. So I've been struggling a little bit against that, but also just the idea of I can't endlessly accumulate these dusty old paperbacks. I'm having a bit of an ongoing logistical problem with my boxes, because I have a bunch of all my possessions, which I mailed back from Japan to Berlin, to my storage unit there in Berlin. But actually, nobody was there to receive them at the time. I hadn't really coordinated that very well. And half of them have been returned to Japan. So I have to go back to Japan and then marshal those, send those to a proper address in Berlin where they won't be returned again. And I'm also, I have issues like that, to deal with. But I'm also kind of, I'm getting to the stage I've described before of balancing the room in the city, or balancing inner and outer, or zooming from a sort of touristic interest in the outside world to a more artistic interest in my inner life again. And so, but also I've been a little bit, it drives you a bit bonkers actually, it makes you a bit insane to be quite so cut adrift. I'm having to waste 6 months of my life at a time when you don't have that many 6 month spans left, It's a bit frustrating, but because I can't take up this lease in my next address in Berlin until July, I'm basically having to just sort of cool my heels in cheap places. So I might go to Kuala Lumpur after this, but that would again be a time in a cheap Chinatown hotel in another hot city with possibly dubious hygiene standards and entomological menace. But that's not what I've been thinking about and what I wanted to talk about today. I wanted to think about, because another thing that's going on at the moment is that I'm promoting this box set which Cherry Red has released of my early creation albums. And I did this interview with Stuart McConey, for instance, in which he introduced me, amongst other very nice adjectives. He used the adjective creepy, said that my records were creepy, and which is fine. I'm all for a bit of creepiness. I think he described it in the interview as the shiver of the fur, or as a sense of beauty and terror being inextricably linked in that Rilkean sense, which is something I've always been fine about. I'm into horror and creepiness as a kind of aesthetic in themselves. I'm not a goth, but I definitely want to investigate that area where you kind of don't know whether you're trembling or in repulsion or attraction. That's very interesting, going to those fault lines, those things you don't quite know what you feel about, or cultural fault lines. So talking to Stuart McConey, I was remembering how I got, just about the time Morrissey was being accused of racism, I was being accused of sexism, and there was, I think there was a confusion between sexuality and sexism, because my lyrics, of course, dealt with sexuality, and it was the time of political correctness, and I fell foul of certain standards, or certain writers, because it was a general cultural battle. I was fighting the editor of The Enemy, who was really a football fan, essentially, who had been put in charge of a music paper, and I was an aesthete and a bit snotty-nosed and snobbish. So I was kind of purged, really, in the early 90s, having been a critic's darling, purged by people who were ushering in the new lad culture of the 90s, which was all about football, patriotism, ironically enough, since these were the same people who actually disparaged Morrissey for being racist and too patriotic and British, but they then went on to invent this term Britpop, and people started wrapping themselves in Union Jacks as a fairly standard gesture after that. And then this whole loaded culture, James Brown and people like that from The Enemy, this became very dominant in the 90s in Britain, and I escaped to live in Paris and got the hell out of there. But in a way, it's I'm nostalgic a little bit for the blood that was drawn. I tasted blood in that particular garden, and I got the taste for it. And I was, in a way, this is another thing I said in that interview, I was a sort of troll avant la lettre. Before people talked about internet trolls, to be an artistic provocateur was very important. For someone who was following Serge Gainsbourg and even David Bowie and people like that, you had to get people's backs up. And people are now amazed, because David Bowie was so bland for so long and so acceptable to so many people for so long. A beloved, saint-like figure. People forget that in the early 70s he was seen as a very dangerous and dark figure. There are certain, I think there's a nationwide TV report where he's described as a symptom of a terrible... And he actually agreed at the time. He said that if people like me and Jagger are the prophets of a society, that society is basically screwed, It has its values all wrong. He was happy to go along with being this kind of antichrist figure. And of course he influenced the Pistols later on to be antichrist figures themselves. And a lot of the most interesting artists are ones who create moral panics at some point in their lives. I had my own mini moral panic with records like Tender Pervert, which I think, quite admirably draws blood, mostly my own blood, because I'm describing myself as a pervert, or God as a pervert, and I'm also, owning up to, or pretending to have done fairly creepy things, in some of the songs. And there's a kind of bataille, transgressive sexuality, which Jezebel, certain websites still to this day would pounce on you and attack you. As in fact, even when Bowie died, there were a couple of negative reports on sites like Salon of his supposed creepiness when he was younger. So I kind of got almost nostalgic because, with these vlogs, for instance, I'm a pretty inoffensive elderly man with slippers and pipe and a pile of old paperbacks, and basically I'm not putting anyone's backs up. I get 0 dislikes. I get 1,000 views for these things if I'm lucky, and 0 dislikes. So that means I'm essentially an unthreatening old codger, But I've been watching the YouTube videos of a guy called Daniel, who's known on YouTube as Hiding in My Room. I guess a sort of hikikomori character, and he's fascinating me because he's essentially provocative and cringeworthy and creepy in all these the negative terms, but he's also very honest and charming in his way, and he's one of these classic millennial kids. It reminds me a bit of Marie Calloway as well, that her fiction has been about her revealing just in this terribly direct way experiences she's had, sexual experiences mostly. She would go on a trip to London and meet with a guy she'd known online, and then she would meet a businessman and make money, being a prostitute for a night, and then go back to him, and then there'd be a drama about why didn't you tell me you needed money, you didn't have to prostitute yourself. All this kind of stuff that it draws blood from yourself. And it's very compelling as a story, and people watch in this sort of car crash way. And some people think that, it's too much information. Basically, I think it's a millennial thing, that the millennials are used to giving too much information. I kind of watch it, I kind of read those stories, and I watch the videos of Daniel thinking, God, I wouldn't do this now. And perhaps I never would have done it in that degree of detail. But I also recognize how compelling it is. I guess it reminds me, the last time I sort of was controversial was in the noughties, when we had blogging, the Blog Wars live journal, me versus Marxy, whatever, and there were sort of these personality clashes which became soap opera-esque, and so I'm thinking again about that, and kind of wondering if that's all behind me now, and because it's not as if my life is boring. I actually am doing interesting things which I could blog about if I didn't respect people's privacy. I could obviously tell you lots of juicy tales about. This guy Daniel talks about his chlamydia, or his one of his videos is called I have a penile yeast infection. It's in that level. It's actually good sexual health information. It's not that different from Stephen Fry telling us the details of his prostate cancer operation, and it's actually quite compelling. I have acquaintances or friends online who are going through various medical procedures now, which no doubt will be increasingly a common experience, and it is compelling. You wonder, I wonder how so-and-so is, and go and read their blog, and you're actually welcoming the information. You want to know that they're getting better, or that even that they're not getting better, you do want to keep informed about it. It's like an extended family. So I'm aware that something I talked about before in these videos is that there's a contrast, there's a contradiction, a paradox between the way you plot out your life in order to have as little drama as possible, and the way you might plot out a story to be as dramatic as possible. I've been listening to Biggles, which is Captain W.E. Johns, this Biggles the Airman, and his various politically incorrect adventures in different continents of the world, part of the British Empire, and he's a sort of RAF man, or a hired hand, sort of James Bond of the biplane, who chases native rogue traders and Eskimos and all sorts of people. And it's sometimes it's narrated by Michael Palin, and of course, that's great in a fiction, but you don't want your life to be like Biggles's life. I mean, nobody really wants unnecessary drama. So, but if you sort of suck, there's a sort of a law of constancy in the sense that if you suck drama out of your life, if you're effective and efficient in making your life undramatic and safe, and sound, morally sound as well as in terms of just safe, you also make it boring, and then you seek out drama, because we're sort of machines made for drama. So I kind of admire this guy Daniel for foregrounding his dramas, and actually even not necessarily having a thick skin, but turning his thin skin into yet more drama. He'll just put videos about reactions to the last videos, and people will endlessly be calling him a creep, and or giving him life advice or whatever. But because of this, it becomes compelling, and you feel close to him, and you recognize yourself in him. There's this universal human thing. Nothing human can alienate me, which glues us all together and makes for compelling art. It's not really art what he does. I was thinking it would be interesting if it was art. I mean, Marie Calloway turned hers into a kind of art. There's a whole generation of Instagram artists like Amalia Ullman, who did claim to be actually making fictive personalities who are using social media to overshare. And then older generation, people my generation or older, Richard Prince, Cindy Sherman, picking up on that Instagram selfie as art thing, and that becoming a trend, and post-internet art, all that stuff. Or I think about Tao Lin and his problems with writing Richard Yates and describing in too much detail a particular relationship he had, and of course being attacked in the end by websites like Jezebel. I think there's also a distinct contrast between the European and American attitudes to these things. Americans are more puritanical, and they're also more misogynistic in general, and I think and also anti-gay. So there's an interesting little contretemps between the Daniel vlogger and a guy called Lost in Japan, the guy who's been running this Lost in Japan thing, or the original Gaijin, I think he calls himself, or Give Me a Break, or Give Me a Flake Man, something like that, who made a whole hour-long video attacking Daniel for letting it all hang out, for revealing too much, for not being sensible, decent, a gentleman, all the rest of it, and yet coming off, in my view, much worse than Daniel, just coming off snotty and trying to claim higher moral ground, but actually, not turning out very sympathetic at all. So a bit like a father, a bullying father telling his son to shut up about his emotional life, or berating him for not being masculine enough, or not keeping it all bottled up. So I don't think you can, as an artist who deals with any personal subject matter, you can never advise people to keep it bottled up. I don't think that's the kind of age we live in. For better or for worse, I recognize in this millennial generation a group of people very like myself in the sense that they're maybe narcissistic, they're maybe a bit autistic, they're often very bright, and they're often playing with persona, but in a way that draws blood, because it's very close to their actual selves and their actual personalities, and they're using actual facts, and they're actually endangering sometimes the privacy of others, or there is this endless sense of betrayal, or the potential to betray, and really having to be very careful and considerate in the line you walk. I think Daniel goes over the line several times and goes into other people's privacy and into unnecessary hurtfulness, and I wouldn't do that. But I think for instance, some of the he's crazy about Japanese women basically, and there's this middle-aged Japanese woman who was in love with him and then got hurt when he split up with her, and now she's vlogging as well. And in a way, rather than committing suicide or whatever, to come up with a new channel and start making your own videos of revenge or whatever, seems like quite a good solution. I don't see why we shouldn't all overshare, why we shouldn't all be part of this crazy Tower of Babel, especially if we're all kind of as I am now, in a kind of weird bubble, isolated and communicating, online with these sort of weird mediated versions of ourselves, puppeteering ourselves in a sense, or making shadow plays of our emotional lives, choosing what to reveal and what to conceal. So that's what I've been thinking about, and foregrounding the inner rather than the outer, getting bored, getting bored even with this fantastic city, and being bored with also being consumptive in the sense of a consumer. A tourist is a consumer, and really the interesting thing starts when you stop being a tourist and you just are. See, I hate this term digital nomad. This is another thing I've been thinking about. Could I be, and am I in a sense already, a digital nomad? A digital nomad is a kind of a person who's been set free geographically from his own culture or his own location by the internet, by the possibility of working online and living in a cheap and pleasant and warm, often a warmer place, but also working back in a cold, uptight and efficient place. One thing you can't import over the internet is hygiene standards, food standards, water and air standards, which you might be hankering for, you might be missing back in, or needing, back in your home country. But pretty much everything else is there in terms of the conditions for a productive life outside of those traditionally advanced industrialized countries or post-industrial countries. So I'm tasting that, the sense of being a digital nomad. There are cafes here in Yangon, the Easy Cafe, Paris Bourgard, or the cafe in the Book Forum. I tend to rotate from cafe to cafe, and in some of them, like the Easy Cafe particularly, that's a little corner of the city which has been actually populated by these digital nomads. I think most of them are down in Bali and places like that, but there are some of them here as well. They're people, they're kind of middle class, confident startup type people in their 30s who often have girlfriends who are Asian and have made children with them and are making lives here and being this kind of I don't know if they have companies here, but they certainly are working online doing digital nomad type stuff. I don't know if I can really qualify myself as that. I'm possibly too old to be that kind of digital nomad. Effectively, that is how I'm existing, but I will be back in Europe from the middle of this year, so I guess it's a temporary state, but it's always a temporary state if you're a nomad. I mean, that is the essence of being a nomad. So yeah, that's probably all I should talk about today. It's probably long enough already, but yeah, it's kind of the interesting moment when you turn inside out and you start losing your voice. So see you next time.
Open University.
I love a swallow flying high, ha ha, ha ha. You all love swallows, so do I, ha ha, ha ha. I love the swallow and tomtit. I'd love to see the swallow flit, but I'd sooner swallow gin in it, ha ha. A glorious thing is an English rose, ha ha, ha ha. It's just like nectar to my nose, ha ha, ha ha. I love a rose, it smells sublime. If it's red or white, it's just the sign. But I'd sooner have Cod's rose any old time, ha ha. I love a bloater in the morn, ha ha, ha ha. Without a bloater I'm forlorn, ha ha, ha ha. And when the waiter says to me,
Are you singing one of
there's no bloater today for tea, that's a terrible blow to me, ha ha. I love a swallow flying high, ha ha, ha ha. You all love swallows, so do I, ha ha, ha ha. I love the swallow and tomtit. I'd love to see the swallow flit, but I'd sooner swallow gin in it, ha ha. A glorious thing is an English rose, ha ha, ha ha. It's just like nectar to my nose, ha ha, ha ha. I love a rose, it smells sublime.
Are you singing one of
If it's red or white, it's just the sign.
green, griller, near,
But I'd sooner have Cod's rose any old time, ha ha.